All right, my name is Sandras. My name is Sandras Phiri. I'm the CEO and founder of Startupcircles.ai, Africa's #1 online accelerator and startup school. So here we help people to launch their businesses and grow them fast. We have a huge community of people from over 30 African countries, and the numbers keep growing. So those of you who are here for the first time, welcome, and you can join our community. We'll post the links in the chat. And for today's session, we're super excited to host Andy Raskin. Andy is somebody that has helped a lot of Silicon Valley startups to craft their narratives, and so the effect of what he teaches is like night and day on your business. What he teaches can literally make a difference between your company taking off in a major way or not. Let me introduce Andy. Andy, welcome to today's session.
Oh, thank you, Sandras. Great to be here and great to meet you. And it's just so great for me to be able to speak to people in places I don't usually get to.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. And I would like to just ask you about, first of all, you're starting out. What led you to writing? I mean, you're starting to talk about narrative. There's a story when you were pitching. Tell us about that. What happened?
Yeah, so I started out as an engineer. So I was a computer science major in college, university, and then I was working at a kind of a tech consulting firm, and a friend and I had an idea for an app. So this is in the .com year, so Windows app I'm talking about, yeah. And we thought it maybe could be a business. So we coded a prototype, and then of the two of us, I spoke English natively. My co-founder was from Japan, and so we decided I should write the business plan. So I wrote it, and this is when you would mail it out to the VC. So we mailed it out, and the reaction that I got was really bad, if we got one at all. So, one investor wrote, "Listen, Andy, I rate every business plan I get on a scale of 1 to 10, and yours is a 1." And we thought maybe that one might be the top of his rating scale, but then he quickly said, in parentheses, worst. So that was kind of dashed our hopes. But then he wrote something else. This was, like I said, we mailed it. So he actually mailed it back, the hard copy. And then he wrote in the margin, he wrote, "Not a compelling story." And I was an engineer. I didn't really think much about this. But it was a few weeks later, I was walking by this bookstore, and I saw in the window, there was a sign that just said, "For anyone who wants to tell a compelling story." And yes. Okay, that's me. And so I look, and there's an arrow pointing to these books, and the books turned out to be screenwriting books. And this was something I never knew anything about. I mean, I watch movies, but I didn't know anything about how to structure a movie. And so I bought the books and started reading them, and I realized that the way they structured the story, and really, it was very different from how I learned to do it. I went to business school and whatever, from how I learned to do it. And in particular, there was this really interesting parallel where there is a pitch at the beginning of pretty much every movie, and that pitch is, to the main character to buy some new adventure, usually something like that, right? And anyway, so I rewrote the plan based on kind of what we learned, and just the change in how much interest we got was just kind of night and day. And so eventually we did get a small investment, and I found that story we created for selling the company was valuable, not just for that, but for selling to customers, for recruiting people, for talking to press. It just became the central thing. And I mean, it just was so fascinating to me. Like, wow, there's not a lot of talk about this. At least back then there wasn't. So that's kind of how it started.
Let's see. And one of the books that you read, The Story by Robert McKee, I happened to read that book as well. And I think it was after watching one of your presentations, and that book is fascinating. And at the time, I was thinking like, what's the connection between movie screenwriting and this? But I read it like, oh, this makes so much sense.
Yeah,
And
I mean that book is not written for an entrepreneur. You know, it's
exactly.
98% of what's in that book is going to be useless to you, like how to plot a scene and things like that. It's
Exactly.
But the core thing of how to start the story and how to structure it, I think is very relevant, like you said.
Brilliant. And now, Andy, if I may, I would like you to please explain to our audience the story of your friend Tim, the super sales guy, who was having problems because potential clients were losing interest, and what happened after he told you about his problems. And the reason I asked is so that the audience can understand that as startups, sometimes there is something that is blocking that pitch from landing. Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, so so there's a guy named Tim. That's actually not his real name. I wanted to protect his privacy, but he had just taken a new. He's a great salesperson, and he had just taken a new sales job. And he told me, "Yeah, I'm getting a little success on these kind of minor deals, but I'm not having a lot of success on really big deals and the ones that can really move the needle." And he showed me his pitch, and it was just a very standard thing that, like, I learned in business school, and like pretty much every sales pitch you usually see, which is, hey, here's your problem, potential customer. Here is the solution we offer to your problem, and here's why it's better than all the other solutions. Problem, solution, differentiators.
Yes.
And it so happened that not too long before that, I had been working with a team. I had already started doing this work with leadership teams. And one of the teams, there was a sales guy who had been at Zuora. And Zuora, you may not everybody knows this company even here, but they had an IPO, a very successful IPO last year. At the time, they hadn't gone public yet, but they make a platform for subscription billing. So most of the billing systems, their ERP systems are made for, transaction. Yeah, I'm going to sell you something, send you an invoice, you pay me. And all these business models were coming up that were like different. They were like, hey, you're going to pay me on a monthly basis, and there's different plans and all this stuff. So anyway, Zuora was doing that. And when working with him, I started telling him about in sharing my philosophy and about the screenwriting books and everything. He said, oh, what you're talking about really reminds me of the pitch we used to do at Zuora. So he used to be at Zuora, and he shared that with me. And I was like, wow, this is exactly structured along the lines that I'm talking about. Yeah. And so I shared that with my friend Tim over, we were having some curry at an all-you-can-eat Indian restaurant in San Francisco. Yeah. And we went through kind of like, what are the pieces of this? Like, how is this structured? So that he could build his own version of it. And he and also some others who I started working with, I started showing them that deck, and they started kind of consistently coming back to me and saying, oh my God, we're getting interest. Because a lot of times the big deal has to have support from higher up. It's like not just the user, but maybe you have to get like C-level people or senior executives from that buyer to buy. And they were telling me, wow, we're getting all this traction now. And in some of the cases, they're saying, hey, we did the biggest deal we ever did. And I really credit a lot of that to this. And that was really eye-opening for me.
Wow, thanks. And so what are the elements of a great pitch deck?
So in that post, and maybe you can share that post with your audience, because it kind of breaks it down even better probably than I can do on a webinar live. But the core one, the big one is, instead of starting with the problem, which is the way we normally start, I like to start. Zuora started instead with what I call it change in the world.
Yes.
And if you think about it, movies all start, the characters living, more or less a comfortable life, and then
Yes.
something happens.
Mm.
There's an event, there's a change in the world. Classic, kids are swimming in the water, and the big shark comes. I don't know if you know Jaws,
Yes.
and that kind of starts the story, right?
Yes.
It's not always an evil thing. Sometimes, a love story,
Yeah.
person's go, okay, and they meet some
Yes.
love interest now.
The inciting incident.
The inciting incident, which is the terminology we now know from Robert McKee.
Yeah.
And so I was like, and it really, Zuora's pitch started with an inciting incident, is what I started to realize. And their inciting incident was they simply said this. They said, we now live in a subscription economy.
Mm.
And they had another slide where they would say, hey, they said goodbye ownership, hello usership.
Mm.
And they're really saying, hey, there's this, used to be, if you were selling things, which is their target customer, you could win by just selling things. They're transactional. Here's a thing, I'll send you an invoice. And they're saying, well, look at all the winners now. They're, if you look at, the Ubers of the world or whatever, they're not necessarily all literally subscription, but instead of selling you a thing, they're selling you a service on a recurring basis.
Yeah.
And that structure, I realized, was really the key to making it all work. I've since that post, I've started to call this the old game and the new game. So at the heart of every pitch, really the beginning of every pitch, instead of problem solution, is old game, new game. And we'll talk about how we can talk about how the product then fits into that. But it's almost as if Zuora is selling not its own platform and software, but the subscription business model, right? And that, I think, is the key to it all. There are some other pieces, but that's really the key one. Do you want me to go through the other ones, or should we just?
That's fine. I think I like that because from your work, we've been also trying to craft what we do at Startup Circles, where the old method of launching companies was linear. You go through ideation, validation, and then you launch. And the old method was entrepreneurs don't know anything. Let's teach them entrepreneurship. Whereas the new method is they're already coming, they know stuff. So they just, say, I need help here. So instead of a map book, Startup Circles is a GPS system. So we're trying to do that.
And ideally, you're couching it in the terms that the game the entrepreneurs have to play. So what it sounds like you're saying is entrepreneurs used to need, I don't know, teachers. Now they need guidance or
exactly
something like that, right? Yeah.
And another example that you have, which is really good, was by Elon Musk. So in February, before COVID hit, which is like BCH, before COVID hit, we were in San Francisco. We were in Silicon Valley and we went to Tesla and we saw the Powerwall. Powerwall is beautiful. But when Elon Musk is talking through that, follows a similar structure where it's not we got the Powerwall. Could you just take us through some of that, like your analysis of that presentation?
For people who don't know, the Powerwall is the battery that is their battery technology from the cars that they have commercialized for storing large amounts of energy. I think one of the applications for Powerwall is in homes. So if you have solar panels on your roof and you want to store the energy for when it's not sunny. And then the other is for very large arrays of power storage for, like, I don't know, a data center, maybe even Tesla to, powering Tesla cars and things like that. And most people would start a pitch like that with the problem. The problem is you need to store energy. Right? And Elon Musk, he did this. So this was in May of 2015. So it's a while ago now.
Yes.
Up until this point, he was known, I think, as this kind of quirky entrepreneur, but not as a great communicator. And it was right after this pitch, like literally moments after he's starting to be hailed as like the next Steve Jobs in terms of his communication. And why is that? Because he doesn't start with what's the problem. He starts in a totally different place. He says, listen, this is the game we're playing, which is fossil fuels. And he actually showed this picture of all this, some kind of burning power plant with the flames and looking really ugly and stuff. And this was a game that was perfectly fine. I mean, no, not perfectly fine, but acceptable for many years. Actually, it's funny to read, like back in I think early 1900s, many cities were overrun by like horse manure from the horse. So fossil fuels was seen as almost like clean tech back then. But he says, and of course that's what's in the mind of most people we're talking to, right? Whether it's energy or it's the software you're selling, they have been using doing whatever they're doing. They're playing some status quo game.
Yes.
And yeah, they could do better, but hey, it's worked okay. It's worked okay for now. And that's always going to be in their head, like, yeah, why rock the boat here? And so we have to, in naming the new game, which for him is solar energy, we're going to have sustainable energy, but he can't just do that. He has to explain the stakes, and this was actually the second piece. And the way he does this is he says, listen, and he shows a chart of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, and he says, listen, look at how this has spiked. He says it's sort of like throughout recorded history, it's kind of low, and then suddenly it spikes up to now. And he said, like, look, we don't even see this in the fossil record. And I think for everybody in the audience for this pitch, you could almost hear the gasp. And it's like people realizing, wow, this is a road to ruin if we keep doing this. And we have to play a new game. And we're looking for the same kind of stakes to be conveyed in any of the pitches. So with Zuora, like I said, one of the things they do is they show, hey, look at all the companies who are winning. They're playing this new game. Look at all the ones who have lost, who are like out of business. Blockbuster. They're selling one-off things.
Yes, and I like that because the traditional, the old way of pitching is that you're saying, hey, you're doing this wrong. Let me show you how to do it. And people get defensive. Like when you're pitching all the time, the people are feeling defensive because saying, what, you're saying we don't know what we're doing? Or you were telling us that with all these qualifications and salaries, you are the one who's going to come and fix this, Whereas with this, like, old game, new game, there'll be winners and losers. You're just showing what's happening. And it's nothing to do with you, that if you maintain things the way they are, you're going to die,
Right. Well, it has to do with them, but it's not personal to them. And we're not making a personal attack on them. And what we're hoping is that they say to us, that's right. Yeah, I do see this. Maybe they haven't put it into words like so succinctly. Like maybe when Zuora was pitching, people didn't quite say, it's a subscription economy. But maybe they saw like, subscription businesses are doing well. And maybe someone in their company said, hey, maybe we should be doing subscription business. So maybe they started hearing murmurs of it, but you have named it and made sense of it for them. And that's the big thing.
And also what I like is that for that, when you're showing the change, it's also saying anybody can do this. You can do it on your own, but then it becomes so daunting for people. Like, and if you introduce your solutions, then you help us get this done.
Right. So we do want to say that it's hard. I mean, so the next piece of it is good. We're kind of going through the pieces. After we've shown the stakes, we want to present what I call the object of the new game. So there's this new game called Subscription Economy, people subscribing things. What does that mean? Where do we have to get to? What state do we have to get to? Like, what's the finish line for us to win this new game? And for Zuora, worded in a bunch of different ways, but one of the ways they did was they said, you have to deliver what we call the subscription experience. And it had a bunch of things like, people can change their plans and I don't know, a bunch of different things. And this delivering the subscription experience becomes a kind of goal state.
Yes.
And then they say, hey, listen, here's why that's going to be hard for you. And they list out a whole bunch of reasons why. Listen, and this is what we want to do. We want to say, hey, here's this goal state, and we want them to say, yeah, that's where I want to get to. And then we want them to say, yeah, it's going to be really hard for us. And then, of course, once we get that, then we're positioned in as, okay, we've got it. And of course, the why it's hard is a little bit similar to it is essentially the problems. But now they take on meaning because we've created context around. They're not just sort of disembodied problems. They're obstacles on the way to a goal state of this new game that has to be won.
Okay. And from a company culture perspective, for CEOs who are building businesses of tomorrow, what would you advise that they bear in mind today as they build with respect to the use of story?
Well, one of my big learnings doing this work, so I've done this now for about 5 years, 6 years, as a full-time thing, is that this really is a CEO job to define the pieces of this story. And, in many organizations, most of the ones I worked in, it's often sort of seen as a marketing thing. Like CEO is going to do the fundraising and maybe the hiring, and maybe work on product a little bit. But the creating of the story is seen as kind of like wrapping paper for making this product look good on the shelf. And what I came to realize was it's maybe the opposite, that the story is really the thing we're building and trying to make it come true, for the customers. And that only if the CEO takes this on as their, owns this, can this be successful. I think it's true of even small companies, but even more so the larger the company. So I've worked with companies that are sort of household name, public internet companies. And in those cases too, it has, when I look at kind of what's been successful, where sometimes it wasn't as much, it was always like, did the CEO lead it? And I lose a lot of business myself because, I do this with companies. If I get contacted by marketing and they say, hey, we want to build this new story for our pitching and for our, and yeah, our CEO will be involved and I'll keep him or her in the loop or whatever. I say no. It has to be the CEO kind of authoring it, being in the trenches with me to work on it. I've insisted on that every time, or at least these days I do. Yeah.
Let's see, and let's talk about that in terms of you mentioned category creation and the CEO's involvement, and give us an example of companies that are trying to name a category and trying to fight, like, who owns this space as you're trying to carve out a niche in a crowded marketplace.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you've seen that there's a slide that this guy in Boston makes every year called the Marketing Technology Landscape, and it's like these logos of like 1 million logos on this slide. It's sort of made its way around a lot. And have you seen it?
I saw it in your slide deck.
Yeah.
But I'm looking for it now. I know what it's called.
Yeah, so you'll find, and he does a new one every year, and I believe he's already done the 2020, and it's basically this huge map of all the different categories in marketing technology. And it started out with a few hundred logos. Now, I think he calls it the Martech 5000, but there's actually like 8,000 logos. And it's so many logos to get on a page. You literally can't see any of the logos because they're just so small. And used to be you could kind of make out the category names, but now you can't even make out the category names because there's so many categories. Even those are hard to figure out. So what I'm saying is I think I have written about naming categories and things like that, and or creating categories. But in a way, I think it's a little bit of a red herring. Meaning, like it's a kind of it's not a great goal, because think about it. Like, for the category to be named, it takes years, and I don't know, somebody at Gartner or G2 or whoever is going to christen this category, and if they use your name, that's great. But if you really look at it, the companies are successful. Even Zuora, really. It's not so much that they're creating categories as they're creating new narratives. And in a way, a new category, in my opinion, really is a new narrative. It's every category is a new game, a new game to be played, right? And so the way I like to think about it is, let's just try and stand out for the new game that we want customers to play. A great example of this is, you asked for some examples, in the sales technology space. There's a company called Gong, based in San Francisco, and Gong, Gong has some competitors, and they're in a space that I think they were all in a space that Gartner was calling conversational intelligence. Intelligence. And what they do is you record the sales calls that your sales team is making, and then using AI, they kind of mine that for intelligence, like, oh, your salespeople are spending too much time on this, or every salesperson who mentions the word two or whatever, gets a deal closed. So you gain insights. And so the CEO, Amit Bendop, he came up with this story that's about, hey, used to be you'd win in sales with opinions, and now you win in sales with a view of reality. So you had their messaging for a while in San Francisco. If you looked on, you went on subways and things like that, it would say, "Goodbye opinions, hello reality." And they've called their view of reality revenue intelligence. That's what gives you this view of reality. Will Gartner take that as an actual category and name it? Will G2 use that? I don't know. Maybe they have already. I don't know. But in a way, it doesn't really matter. They've stood out so much by just being known for this story. Even Salesforce, one of the great narrative stories, when Mark Benioff back in 2000 said, "Hey, the end of software. The software era is over." Of course, he means installed, managed software that you're owning, and now we're going to be in the age of the cloud. The CRM category was long established, in Salesforce automation, long established. He didn't create a new category, really, unless you want to say cloud CRM is a separate category. What he really did was say, hey, there's a new game that we need to be playing within this category.
Brilliant. Yeah. And you have worked with a lot of startups, and startups are around the world. What specific insights would you have for startup founders in Africa, or just advice?
Well, I don't know if I could give great advice, since I don't know. I've been to Morocco, but I have not traveled widely through Africa. Maybe you could tell me, what do you think that the kind of things I'm talking about resonate with the kind of challenges that you're seeing folks have?
Yes, I think it does, because when we're pitching, and a lot of times when people are starting out, we're finding that people are starting SaaS companies, for instance, and saying, we're going to do this software as a service, and they say, we don't have competition. And we also get people say, oh no, we just come in because we're the best. Then we also have people who are doing commodities, like they're selling honey or chili or anything that you can just pick off the shelf, saying, so the challenge for all of these is to say, how do we stand out?
Yes.
How do people
Yes.
say I'm looking for that instead of I'm just looking for honey?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like I'm.
And this question of how do we stand out? This is the big question, whether I'm hearing it from someone who's like just a business plan and an idea versus CEO of public company trying to position some, some new direction. And one of the things, relevant to what you said, where people say, hey, we have no competition. I mean, in a way, we want to, we really believe that often. And in a way, hopefully it's true. Like, hopefully nobody else is doing it the kind of the way we are, or kind of looking at it the way we are. One of the ways that I like to think about this in terms of how we present the story is to say, the traditional way to present competition is, well, problem, solution, here's our solution, and then let me tell you why it's better than all the rest, or let me tell you why there aren't anybody else who's doing this, right? And I like to flip it and talk about competition before we talk about our stuff. So, and the way, because, and the way we like to do it is, that I've done with a lot of teams, hey, here's this new game. And of course, here's the object of the game, like we talked about. And we said, remember, here's why it's going to be hard to win that game. So here's the obstacles. And then often we'll do a slide that says, no one else, or the old tools weren't built for this, or no one else is built for this. And we're going to explain why the others that others might think of as competitors for us are not going to help you get over or help the prospect get over those hurdles. What is lacking in them to get over it? And by doing that, before we even get to our stuff, we're kind of almost showing that there's this hole in the world, something needed. And then we can say, well, that's why we built, Startupcircles.ai, to provide this, whatever, or our company. And I've often, actually, so I have a podcast. I started interviewing the CEOs that I've been working with, and the one that's going to air next, which is the one I'm editing right now, when the CEO contacted me, it was this problem. So this was a Series A company, like, hey, like, how are we going to stand? We keep pitching and people say, well, how are you different from this? How are you different from this? And to him, it was like, oh my God, we're nothing like that. But to them, it was the same. And then, so he started pitching this way, and that went away. He just started never to hear this again. In a way, it's kind of doing the objection handling up front. We're talking about these competitors that we know we're hearing about first, and then we show the where we.
Great, thank you very much.
So actually, I saw a question from a woman named Janice.
Yes,
I thought was really, really interesting. Did you see this one, Sandras?
You can go ahead. I haven't seen it.
Okay, so she says, are investors ready for a disrupted pitch format? Yeah, and the reason I love this question is because I think many of them may not be. And one thing is, as you notice, like I talk about sales, and the companies I work with, the kind of instrument that we're using to get the story straight is the sales deck. Often that becomes the heart of the investor deck. And truth be told, I have worked with some entrepreneurs on their investor deck. But in my experience, like some of the investors are so picky and so kind of idiosyncratic in what they want out of the way they want it structured. It has to, some literally will say it has to be the problem, the solution, and so you're taking a risk if you are doing it in any different way. I think the risk is worth it usually, and sometimes maybe you can kind of shoehorn what I've said into whatever their structure is. But I actually don't make my living advising people on investor decks for this reason. It's just too much variation in what they all want. And I wouldn't want to put myself out there to say, hey, you should structure your investor deck exactly this way. That said, I have seen a lot of folks use this structure successfully. Of course, there has to be a lot more in your investor deck than just what we've talked about. There's all the other pieces, but yeah.
Great. So Andy, I've actually seen that when people put in the story and craft it, but by putting it in that when you're describing the problem and solution, and then you put in that, it's more memorable than people just go stats, facts, and then at the end of the pitch, 5 people, 10 people are pitched. We don't remember anything about them.
Yeah. I see a question from Yogita.
Yes.
Who says, wouldn't it seem like you're bashing the competition if you're saying, hey, the old tools weren't built for this, and you're saying, oh, here's why this company won't do this, here's why here's why all these are not going to be sufficient to help you win this new game. This is a great question too, because often it is very sensitive. You don't want to be seen as kind of like doing that. And this can vary by situation. Some companies literally do want to name it because it's just so much out there. Like, oh, everyone's going to think of this company. Well, might as well mention it. But one way a lot of my clients have gotten around this is we just talk about kind of groups, almost like buckets of companies. So in the example I was talking about with the podcast guest I have, they're in the cybersecurity space for medical devices. And so one group is what's called like monitoring solutions. So there's a lot of cybersecurity, not just for medical devices, but just for like your network of your company, whatever. That's all about, hey, we're going to monitor the network and see if there's a problem, and then we'll alert you when there's a problem. And he's basically saying, listen, we can't, those kinds of solutions are not going to work for you because, look, if someone hacks the pacemaker, like someone's dead before you get the notification. Like you can't, that's not going to work. So they're not naming individual companies. They're naming kind of groups or buckets of types of companies to say, hey, here's why these folks won't work.
Okay, great. Yeah. There was a question from Andy, I think, from Joe. I think you've answered it, saying, is there a difference between how to use story for sales pitches versus investment pitches? I think that's one that's been answered. And then another question is from Wesley, like, if you had to get 3 points of information across to potential investors, what would it be? Or I mean, how would you do it? So in other words, if you're putting across 3 different things, would you craft one story that captures that, or it's 3 different stories?
Yeah, so I think that, I think this, I'm kind of hearing behind the question is maybe somebody's been told like, hey, investors are only going to remember 3 points. So what 3 points should we give them, right? And the way I see it is like, really there should be 1 point. That's the main point. The 1 point is, what is this change in the world that you see happening that you believe is a business opportunity? That's which is the change in the world, right? The things that then have to go into backing up that, okay, well, why is it going to be hard for people to win the new game? So why would you be needed? What do we bring to the table? And then for an investor pitch, there's other things. So why is doing this a big opportunity for you as an investor, which is basically TAM, and the total addressable market? And then there's also pieces like, well, what have we done so far? So traction and things like revenue model. So how is this going to be, work on in general, and how is it going to work in revenue per thing? But I really think instead of thinking of, oh, they have 3 slots in their head and we can only fill 3 slots, what should we put in there? We're looking to engage the way you engage in a movie. And think about movies, like there's if you really get into a movie, you're up for hearing about a lot. You're up for sitting there for hours and learning about a lot of stuff. You might not remember everything, but you're up for doing that, right? And so I think in a similar way, we want to draw them in and be raising question. The structure of a great story or a storytelling, according to this guy Ira Glass. I don't know if you know this radio program and podcast called This American Life. A very big, really great resource for anyone who's interested in stories in general. But the host says the structure of a great story is raising questions and answering them. It's simple. And so, if we raise a question, it's like a mystery. Someone wants to know the answer, then answer it, but then raise another one, and this is the structure you want to see if we can go through. And so, question, what is the new game? Oh, well, why is that hard? Oh, well, how are you? Oh, well, and try and be anticipating the question and then answering and create new one.
Brilliant. And I think also that with stories, while a lot of things are changing, our love of stories is not really changing. It's just the format of storytelling is what's changing. We listen to stories, we watch stories, which are movies, and like all of these. Why do you think that is? Like, why do people try to remember story or want to hear a story?
I don't know. There's been all this research about like our brains are wired for stories and stuff. I don't really, who knows? But to me, what's the most interesting part of it is the story seems to be how we make decisions in the world. So, we like to believe that we gather data, we look at, we basically see what are our options for make a decision. We evaluate all the options, and then we choose the best one, which is kind of the model that's in our heads when we're doing problem solution differentiators. We think that the other person is going to be doing that kind of analysis in their head. And what seems to really happen is the world, especially in a big business or whatever, is so complex that people can't really do that kind of analysis.
Yes.
And instead they rely on a shortcut. And the shortcut is they have a story in their head about how the world works and what game they need to play to thrive. And so we're always looking. It feels like we're sort of built to be looking for what is that next story that's going to help me go, and then to kind of let go of the old one. And I think that's the dynamic that's kind of at play here.
Fantastic. And any other advice for entrepreneurs, especially for sales? And in this case, I'd like to emphasize sales because I find that working with entrepreneurs, you have a huge team of startup founders or a founding team, and nobody's doing sales. Okay, we got marketing, or everybody is in sales, and sometimes you find that the founder says, "But I'm introverted. I'm not a speaker, so I can't do that." What advice do you have for founding teams in sales?
Well, sales. I just posted on LinkedIn. I don't know if you saw this. It got a lot of attention. That one of the things that I really regret or have a complaint about my MBA business school education was there was really no sales training in it.
Yes.
And I came out kind of like what you're saying. I mean, I had a job in management consulting, and I was terrified of sales, which pretty much assures that your career in management consulting will be very short, because pretty much quickly you have to start selling business, and pretty much assures your career in almost anything will be very short. And, for me, I kind of came to it. I learned about selling as I went along. I'm not a salesperson by training, so I don't know that I can give great advice that way. What I will say is, I think Elon Musk is a really instructive example. Before that Powerwall pitch, and even maybe later, he was kind of seen as not a very polished speaker. And even in that Powerwall speech, he's doing a lot of ums and ahs, and I don't know. And, he's Elon Musk, so he gets a little bit of a pass on those things. Oh, it's kind of cute. But what I think happened there is he structured the story so well. He structured this pitch so well. It didn't matter. And so, there's a lot of there's a lot of people who will coach on, how to hold yourself and how to breathe and present a story and, the physical part of it. And I think don't get me wrong, I think that is very valuable. And I've learned a lot from people like that. But this is, I feel like that's a smaller part of it than the structuring of the story, so that people will be engaged.
Yes, I like that. And so I think I heard from you as well, that it's almost like you need a proper structure that anybody can tell that story. Almost like a joke. There are certain jokes that depends on the people telling the joke. Whereas other jokes, the structure is so well that anybody can tell the joke and everybody will laugh.
Yeah, I love how you just put that. Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you for this. Really, it's been such an honor to have you here today. And we'll share the links that you talked about, like the Zora, the greatest sales pitch I've ever seen on Medium, and the link to your podcast as well.
Great. And if anyone wants to connect with me, because I'm writing about this stuff usually on LinkedIn, that's become kind of my major outlet for just sharing learnings about this stuff. I invite you to connect with me, Andy Raskin, on LinkedIn, and would love to continue the conversation with people there.
Fantastic. We'll do that. And thank you very much. I know, like, your work, I just went into Medium and just like reading your stuff, like, wow, and going onto YouTube. And, it's really, really great to have this opportunity to talk to you.
That's great. And it was a pleasure for me. It was great talking with you, Sandras. Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here today. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.